All extracts are taken from titles within the Stories to be Told series. Copyright Tracy D. Williams 2021. Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. Welcome back for another episode of Stories to be Told, the podcast series. The month of October always marks Black History Month here in the UK, and this year is particularly exciting because in another 8 days' time it's going to be our first anniversary. That's right, STBT, the podcast series, will officially be 1 year old. And we aim to celebrate this milestone throughout the month. Now, I thought I'd dedicate this month, as I did in the month of January this year, to the stories, since they are what my work and vision are all about. If you're new to Stories to be Told and my podcast series, I want to extend a warm welcome and encourage you to find out more about my vision and rationale by listening to my podcast episode called Spread the Word. Those of you who have listened to parts 1 and 2 of the story so far will remember that I said that the idea for this podcast series came after the stories were written. I'd done so much research and so much of my learning journey about the British Empire had not made it into the actual stories. So, through the podcasts, I wanted to provide another dimension to the STBT experience to appeal to listeners as well as readers. In this story so far, part 3, I'm going to take another opportunity to share with you extracts from the next 4 stories in the series. Now, to be honest with you, as my dedicated listeners, you know that I work as a school leader and the beginning of the autumn term is so busy. I've been studying for an advanced diploma during the last academic year, but during my August break, I took some time to reflect and decided to restructure my approach to managing this podcast and promoting the stories, being realistic and thinking longer term. I'll be featured in more interviews and will publish more articles, and it's been great to network with other authors as well. I'm also looking ahead and plan to revamp the website soon. This will obviously take time to develop, but that's okay. We have new content to place on the website and we're going to revamp some of what is already there. This extract that I'm going to share with you in this podcast episode is taken from the Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong. This story is complemented by the 5th podcast episode in the first season, Anyone for Tea? The Colonisation of Hong Kong, where I shared my learning journey about how Britain's interest in tea led to Hong Kong becoming a British colony. Now, someone may be asking right now, why are you marking Black History Month with a story about Hong Kong? My reason for doing this is that I have come to recognise as an educator that Britain's colonial past and colonialism itself didn't just affect Africa in terms of shaping my own ancestry and diaspora. Therefore, Stories to be Told has always aimed to broaden this narrative and tell stories, not just about how colonialism took place, but also how it affected Indigenous people around the world, who, as a result, were displaced or migrated or were carried beyond their borders to a new land. In doing this, Stories to be Told also views learning about colonial history as an approach to establishing a more global perspective in learning about the past, particularly for pupils aged 9 to 14. So that's the reason why we're also featuring a story about Hong Kong this month. Okay, that's enough pontificating. Let's get into the stories. Let's read a portion of The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong. Now, before I read, let me provide some context. In 1979, Britain's possession of Hong Kong was coming to an end, as the 99-year lease that it had been granted by China in 1898 was set to expire in 1997. Some of the story is about how this transition period is negotiated between Britain and China. Now, as with any negotiation process. There is always tension, and this section of the story tells about the tension between President Deng of China and a certain British PM who went by the name of Margaret Thatcher. So this is from chapter 2 and it's called Face Off. The idea of giving back Hong Kong was first discussed in 1979, as Mr. Heath and Mrs. Thatcher showed willingness to negotiate from both sides. It was hard to separate the mainland and territories from one entity into two. Both the British and Chinese governments asked, what should we do? The infrastructure of the territories were technologically inspired, and this was central to Hong Kong's survival even after the lease had expired. To return Hong Kong to the arms of China was hard to accept or believe. An act for the common good or political tactics to save reputations without committing deceit. When Mrs. Thatcher visited the People's Republic in 1982, Deng said, I could take all territories and Hong Kong this very afternoon. Thatcher replied, you may be right, as there's no way that I can stop it. But treaties ought to be respected. Don't create a dispute that will deadlock it. China's colonial association with Britain originates from the 19th century with their defeat in both Opium Wars, paying reparations to Britain and ceding Hong Kong to Britain as a British colony. This came with global implications when China also became subject to the open door policy of the West. China has always deeply resented this intrusion from the West and has been retaliating ever since, utilising the West's intellectual property to become the largest manufacturing hub and gradually overtaking the US as the largest economy in the world. It is now China who has become emboldened into building its own empire in the 21st century. In the past, it was European countries such as Britain and France who exploited slave labour and raw materials to finance their own infrastructures and revolutions into an industrial era. Now, China is leading the new scramble for Africa, taking advantage of the continent's vast amounts of natural resources, but also investing into Africa's railway, property and manufacturing infrastructures. This has made China Africa's main trading partner over the last 20 years, enabling China to introduce its culture, currency and religion across the continent. Will all this investment benefit the people of Africa, and can they work together to prevent themselves from entering into another debt trap? China's aspirations also include seeking unification with Taiwan, also known as the Republic of China. Following the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1912 and the defeat of the Kuomintang party with its ideology to transform China into a fledgling democracy, its leader, Chiang Kai-shek, moved to Taiwan in 1949 and together with the remnants of his party and much of China's intellectual elite, established a democracy on the small island. In 1971, Taiwan lost its seat at the UN and was forced to be recognised under China, losing its status as a sovereign nation. This has strengthened China's view of Taiwan as an external threat to its own one-party state ideology, making Taiwan vulnerable to Chinese invasion and at risk of being assimilated into China. With only a few countries recognising Taiwan's sovereignty, who will come to Taiwan's aid? Will Taiwan benefit directly or indirectly from the pact between Australia, Britain and the US in answer to the rising threat of China's influence to Australia and Southeast Asia? Taiwan has been so successful that its national growth and global output is greater than that of many European countries. Together with Singapore, South Korea and Hong Kong, Taiwan is known as one of the 4 Asian tigers due to their economic and democratic success. So, what of Hong Kong? Today, it also lies vulnerable as China becomes increasingly intolerant of the 50-year transition agreement with Britain of a one country, two systems process. Despite a historical win for Hong Kong's pro-democracy camp in 2019, winning 392 out of the 452 council seats across all 18 of Hong Kong's districts, pressure from Beijing to suppress democracy has caused unrest and protests in Hong Kong over the last few years. The Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions recently made the decision to disband amid growing concerns of security threats, and the space for peaceful protests is gradually diminishing. Is this China's way of deflection relating to their own role and responsibility for the pandemic? As Britain and the US offer a safe haven to Hong Kong residents, it seems that we have completed yet another full circle in the post-colonial narrative of Hong Kong. If you liked this podcast, you can stay on my website or this listening platform and check out my other podcasts in relation to this one. There's not only the other episodes in the Story So Far series, but also Anyone for Tea, the Colonisation of Hong Kong and its reprisal, as well as Painting the Map Red, Is China Breaking Up the Commonwealth? And Spread the Word, to understand my rationale and vision. These are all from the first and second seasons. And don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my other stories or poetic narratives: Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Knights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change. These are all available on the website in both Kindle and paperback formats, and in ebook format at Apple Books and all other digital platforms. And also the publication of the latest 4 titles. Now, if you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. Visit storiestobetold.com for the other learning content, and where you can sign up for my latest newsletter, the chance to win a promotional giveaway each month for one lucky person on my email list, as well as receiving your free samples of my first 4 titles. And finally, remember that you can also send me an audio message on the SpeakPipe link, which is also in the show notes, so don't be a stranger. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click onto whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And as always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening again, and I'll see you on the next page.